From New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire, you're listening to Check This Out, a new literary series where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. I'm your host, Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. I am thrilled to be able to share these conversations with you. This is the last episode of Season 2, and I'll be back in the fall with Season 3 and a brand new slate of exciting books and authors that we have to discover. But today on the show, my guest is Kaliane Bradley, and we will be discussing her debut novel, Ministry of Time. The novel imagines a near future in which the British government is testing the viability of time travel by transporting various people from the past to the present. They essentially pluck people out from the edge, grab them just before they die, and bring them to the present so as to prevent ripples in the future. It all starts off with good intentions, of course, very scientific, or so it seems. The novel centers on a small group of these time travelers and their minders, a group of secret agents who are tasked with living with them and watching over them to study the effects of time travel. The focus is Commander Graham Gore, who was plucked from 1847, and the woman tasked with watching over him, who is our unnamed narrator. Sparks fly between the narrator and Graham, mystery ensues, and we have a time travel romance, a spy thriller, and a workplace comedy all rolled into one. Throughout it all, the question I kept asking was around time travel. Can it ever be anything but a weapon? And a question I've been stuck on for years: why are we obsessed with time travel? Kaliane, welcome to Check This Out. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
This book has just exploded out of the gates. Congratulations on an amazing launch, an amazing debut.
Thank you. It's been quite spectacular and unnerving. I mean, it's all part of the work of my brilliant publishing team.
And also the brilliant writing. To start us off, could you please read from the book? Let's hear your voice.
Absolutely. So I'm going to read from early on in the book. And it's a segment where Commander Graham Gore, is in the 21st century and busily adjusting to 21st century Britain. He didn't like 21st century language. Victorian was his greatest descriptive enemy, and to be fair, I'd heard people apply the word miscellaneously to any period 1710 to 1916. But much of what I thought of as quintessentially Victorian was in his future, and to him, gargantuan, disproportionate, ungentlemanly, unpious. He didn't understand my use of the term classical music, which meant something to do with formal classicism to him and meant to me that it had violins. He hated text as a verb, sex as an act, tomato as a salad product. One afternoon he came in from a walk and asked me, very thoughtfully, "Some charming young women, out on the heath, addressed me quite boisterously. What is a DILF?" It goes without saying that he called me half-caste. Perhaps it goes without saying that it took a while for me to correct him. I'd used the term myself before I'd learned not to. Graham used other words too, not wrong exactly, but not right, like your people or your culture. When I said in a wincingly tight voice that we had the same people and culture, he replied, mildly, "But I don't think that we do."
Thank you, Kaliane, for sharing that piece of the book. Right there, you gave us an example of how it's funny and serious.
Thank you very much. I'm always delighted when someone calls me funny. My self-esteem lifts by 3 points.
I mean, it's very serious, right? We're talking about serious things, classicism versus classical music, right? How words and their meaning have shifted, and yet you captured it in a funny way that just pulls people right in.
I'm so glad. It was, I think it's really at the heart of what I was doing, which is just trying to make me and my friends giggle.
Giggle, but again, you're making light of something, and this is why the book is so good. You're making light of something that, in fact, is actually really heavy. This is a very big theme, and so I want to dive right in. The second part of what you read was about the narrator herself and how she defines herself, how she sees herself. Tell us about this unnamed narrator.
So the unnamed narrator of the book, she's Graham Gore's bridge. These civil servants are called bridges. They provide the bridge between the expats' original era and the 21st century. And she is a mixed-race, white-passing British Cambodian woman, as I am. And she has quite a complicated relationship to her heritage and her place in British society. She has a very complicated relationship to the fact that she looks like a white woman, but is not. She's got a complicated relationship to her family history and her experience of inherited trauma, the inherited trauma of the Khmer Rouge. She's got a complicated relationship with the British state and power structures within it, particularly as she works in the civil service, and how the power structures pertain to her and what it might mean for her ambitions, her career ambitions.
So I want to get back to this white passing or passing idea in just a second. But and one thing that really caught me about your narrator is, in terms of space in the book, there were only a few paragraphs in which she mentioned that she had inherited trauma and that her mother had gone through some horrible things in Cambodia. But in my mind, those few paragraphs really took up a lot more space because I kept wanting to hear more, kept waiting to hear about it. And, even though you only wrote about it a few times. So was that also something from your own past, or how did you think about putting that in the book?
It's a really good question because when she was originally conceived, she wasn't British Cambodian. She wasn't really anything. She was just a reader proxy, basically. The whole book was originally written in second person. Madly, I'm glad we changed that. She actually was pulled out of a different book I was writing, which was going to be, in my head, the great British Cambodian novel, quote unquote, which would have been about Khmer Rouge, Cambodia in the 60s and 70s, the diaspora, and then the British Cambodian community. And because I had a whole cast of characters in that book who were reacting to being in the UK and having Cambodian heritage in different ways. I had one character who was very much like the Bridge, had a very complicated relationship with power structures, and with the way that she presented. And so I pulled her out and put her in this book because the Ministry of Time is partly about the legacy of the British Empire. And I thought it would be interesting to have a British imperialist battling emotionally with a former, Cambodia was a French colony rather than a British one, but with a former colonial subject, someone from a family whose family was formerly colonized. What there is of me in her is tricky because I think we are very different people, and I wasn't really interested in writing myself. If I'm anyone in the book, I am the narrator's sister, a wannabe writer who works in publishing and is constantly thinking about the way that her identity works as a piece of art in prose. What I was interested in for the Bridge, I think I often wonder about complicity, not just mixed race complicity or white passing complicity with white supremacy, or political complicity with overarching power structures. And so because that preoccupies me so much, I think that's the main thing that I've put in the Bridge.
Also very real, right? That inherited trauma would be something that is always in the background, even if you're not devoting much space to it, up front.
Absolutely. It's like the terrible thunderous background noise to a human soul.
Wow. What a beautiful way to describe it. Let's go back to this idea of passing, white passing, but it more generally as a theme, because we have your second main character, Graham Gore, who comes from 1847. But in a sense, he's also passing, right, for someone from the present day. So he's also trying to, look just like anybody else or assume the mantle of he fits in with everyone. Tell us about Commander Gore.
Actually, it's never been put to me that explicitly, and that's exactly right, that he is. All of the expats from the past are attempting to pass. They are attempting to pass as 21st century British citizens. I talk a lot, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, I talk a lot about the process of assimilation and what that means for refugees either from time or from different countries. But yes, exactly, they are trying to pass. They are trying to pass as 21st century citizens. So Graham Gore has been pulled from 1847 from this doomed Arctic expedition, which I know a lot about. Unfortunately, I've gone quite mad thinking about it. And he is it's funny for me to describe this because he is my dashing romantic lead, and he's also an imperialist. There's no way of getting around this. He was part of a British expedition to find a passage through the Arctic for the trading advantage of the United Kingdom. They turned up there. They didn't ask the Inuit. They renamed their country. They didn't ask the Inuit. They didn't, get any kind of permission. They just assumed they were allowed to. And Graham Gore was a real historical figure. Obviously, your listeners can't see this, but there he is just behind my shoulder, a photo of him. He was a real historical figure. And he, by all accounts, was an incredibly kind, very charismatic man. Everyone who sailed with him and has mentioned him in journals and letters tend to praise him. You know, one of his shipmates said, oh, he's a man of extremely high character, great stability of character, very sweet temper. But there are 2 letters by him that still exist. And he's very funny, occasionally self-deprecating, a little bit playful, and also very clearly, hardline supporter of the empire, fought in the Opium Wars, believed in it, believed in the British Raj, believed that British rule was necessary. And that contradiction was really interesting to me because, I mean, the reason I became so fascinated by him is that he did seem so charming. And I think the picture's very dashing. I've had a lot of arguments with people about this. So I wanted to bring this personable, charismatic man who made himself, who people liked and were attracted to, who could get on in most companies. I wanted him to arrive in 21st century Britain and find that his values are completely at odds with the values of the country that is his country, that is also not his country.
So I, of course, had to look up the picture of him when I read that you had based him. He's your one character that is a real historical figure, and there's like one photo of him that exists. So I looked it up, and he is dashing.
Yes. Thank you so much. Because I have like people say, oh, I looked him up after I read the book, and when they get this very uncomfortable expression on their face as if they're about to confess something really criminal, they're like, he didn't look like I imagined he would. It's like, what were you expecting? Were you expecting like a human loaf of bread who belongs in a franchise movie? What do you want? He was a Victorian.
Exactly. And he was also very real. I mean, he looked like it could have been that he was playing dress up, and that he had taken this picture in 1847, but actually he lives today.
Absolutely. He's got that twinkle in his eye that suggests he's not taking the whole thing entirely seriously. He's got a very faint smile.
Right, because it is hard to find somebody that you can plop down in the present day and make it seem like they could assimilate, that they could pass.
Absolutely. And it's helpful that he actually didn't spend very much time in England at all because he was a career sailor. He went to sea at the age of 11. We've been able to work out, and he was more or less constantly at sea until his death. We assume he was around 37, 38. We're not sure because we're not sure exactly what happened up there. But he didn't spend very much time in England at all. He was constantly having to assimilate to different cultures, different places, different climates, different mores, different wardrooms. He was an explorer.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum, and you're listening to Check This Out on NHPR. My guest today is Kaliane Bradley, and we're talking about her brand new debut novel, Ministry of Time. Right now, we're going over her main characters. There are 2. There's an unnamed narrator, and there is Commander Graham Gore, who is plucked out of time from 1847, just before he's about to die, while he's up in the Arctic, and he's on this real-life expedition. He is based on a real-life character. So you talk about all of the things in the book that he sees that are totally different from 1847. So he finds toilets, he finds motorcycles. For the listeners, Kaliane is laughing because it's funny. It's funny the way in the book, too, how he explores them. There's a plumbing problem because he's pulling things apart to figure out how they work. And this seemed very, very real. And these were funny pieces. But then there were more serious pieces, too, that he found completely confounding and he was confused by. And one of the things that I loved the most was sexuality. You don't shy away from talking about the differences and what he finds and what some of the other travelers find, too. So talk to us about that.
That was really fun to do. I mean, partly it was fun to do because I love the idea of having this man from a patriarchal society who, he wouldn't have found that an insult to be called a patriarch or patriarchal. He would have thought, absolutely, I am a patriarch. That's wonderful. Brought to the 21st century, and he has to live with the bridge, the narrator, as part of his assimilations. But she's functionally in charge. They're both like officers of their respective eras, but she's the senior officer. She's monitoring him, she's looking after him, she's reporting on him. So for the first time in his life, he is in a position of social inferiority and vulnerability, which is really startling to him. So I really enjoyed, first of all, playing with this mismatch, which would have been very bizarre and uncomfortable for him. But then even the very existence of this woman who has a career, has gone to university, is walking around unmarried and living with an unmarried man, which is just so scandalous to him. She's wearing a skirt. He can see her calves. He doesn't know what to do about this. He's constantly looking away. So even like the very image of a liberated woman is so new to him, and it completely recasts how he understands his position within the household, like his domestic position, his political position, his social position. It really blows his mind. I think he really struggles. One thing that comes up quite early on in the book is the notion of sexuality as an identity, so that we can describe ourselves as straight, as gay, as queer, as lesbian, which you just wouldn't have done in the Victorian era. You were either, what we now call heterosexual, or you were deviant in some way. There was some kind of problem or issue, some kind of criminality. So when he's introduced to the idea that people do make identities out of their sexuality, it's so alien to him, he takes a long time digesting it. On the other hand, there is a woman called Margaret Kemble, who is pulled from the Great Plague of London. And when she arrives, she is given the word lesbian. She's never had this word before. She's never had a way to describe her relationships with women or the way that she sees herself. And for her, it's immensely affirming and liberating. Now she has a community, an identity. She has somewhere she can go. She has a world she can explore. She gets on Tinder. Obviously, she immediately gets on Tinder. And so I liked that the differences in possibility there.
I love this. I mean, this is what I mean when I say the book is funny. Your characters get on Tinder, right? And they're trying to figure this out. And yet this is a serious topic because for the first time, Margaret is, exploring her sexuality or allowed to call herself a lesbian through Tinder. So, right, you have the serious balanced with, the more lighthearted, and it makes it easier to access that theme.
So I'm glad you thought that. Yeah, absolutely.
And it also makes the characters, these historical characters in the book, much more real and much more relatable. Because I think it's easy to look at historical characters like a Commander Gore and you see his photo and you have his official, documents, and we make them very straight-laced, very, by the book people. But in real life, nobody is like that. And so you brought them to life with those details.
And you're absolutely right. I think that when we look at historical characters, the temptation is to kind of create an outline based on what we know about history and then try to squeeze them into it. And one thing I was very keen to do when I brought these expats over into the 21st century is that they would resist a historical narrative. They wouldn't be the traditional Victorian man, the traditional Edwardian man, the traditional Jacobean woman. I wanted them to be, their individuality is fighting their way through this historical imposed narrative.
And sexuality is a very big part of this book because there is the love story between the narrator and Graham Gore. And, I'm cheering for them to get together and you're holding it off. And she's asking him about his past. Has he been with women? It comes out that he's actually been perhaps with men because he's been on ships for a long time with just men. And so it's always there as an undercurrent.
It's always there as an undercurrent. And even the conversations that they have are, they come from completely different viewpoints, because she's like, I just want you to be honest about your past and I want you to explain to me who you are. And his view is that the things he has done sexually are not who he is. In many ways, he would like to compartmentalize those entirely and treat them as separate from him, from his self, from his presentation. That was a lot of fun.
So back to this idea of passing and labels too. Commander Gore, Graham, 1847. These are all the names that he gets throughout. So 1847, as he's looking at his minder, at his bridge, he's trying to sort of figure her out, and he's fixated on her mouth. Let's talk about that detail.
He is fixated on her mouth. So I'm trying to do this without spoilers. So when she first meets him, she doesn't tell him that she's mixed race. She assumes she's passing as white, as she so often does. And so she, for convenience, as she describes it, just, for a frictionless experience, she doesn't tell him. So it's a kind of lie through omission. She has a conversation later with one of the other bridges, who is a black woman who does not pass as white. She is a black woman who says, you can't have a proper relationship with this person and they can't be expected to adjust to the 21st century if you are lying about your very self. So they eventually come close to having a conversation about it, but before she can admit anything, he says to her, hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think you are not yourself entirely an Englishwoman. He has spotted that she is not actually white. And she, she in an attempt to kind of play it down, she's slightly startled by this conversation. She says, yeah, what gave it away? Was it the shape of my eyes? And he says, no, it was the color of your mouth. And she is so shocked by this because no one has ever said that to her. It's baffling and slightly erotic microaggression. It will become clear throughout the course of the book that his interest in the color of her mouth isn't just because, he's romantically staring at her mouth, but because she reminds him of another woman, a woman of color, who he has interacted with in his previous life that she knows nothing about, in his life back in the Victorian era.
Let's go back to these power dynamics because, of course, when Gore is talking about the color of the narrator's mouth, he's trying to slot her into a spot that essentially puts her at a lower power, a lower place of power compared to him. But in fact, there is a power dynamic between the two of them just to begin with. And she is the one who has more power because she is the minder. And so this is a constant theme throughout the book. Let's talk about power dynamics.
Everyone in this book is either struggling for more power than they have or resigning themselves to having less power. And I'm really glad that you pulled that out because I think it's such a crucial part of the book. The narrator very much goes into the novel and her story works out the way it does because she is so interested in this idea of control, of power, of control, of never having to go through the kind of trauma that her family did ever again. It causes her to make certain decisions which take her down certain paths. In the same way, someone like Graham Gore, and there's another a man who was pulled from the English Civil War called Thomas Cardingham, are two people who are now having to adjust to the idea of having ceded power to women and to people of colour. And they find this very difficult to come to terms with, and they find their own way of coming to terms with it. In the case of Thomas Cardingham, by being a really objectionable, misogynistic, dreadful person. And in Graham's case, in trying to find a new way to belong and to express belonging and to express personal strength. And I think also there's a kind of background hum, like a sort of devilish mutter about what exactly this ministry is. Why does the British government have time travel? If the British government had time travel, would they be doing anything good with it? And so even the very premise of the book, which is given to the reader as a, hooray, we're having a fun workplace comedy, which is a romance, and there's a little bit of time travel, is actually a question of political power and what it means.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out on NHPR, and my guest today is Kaliane Bradley. We're talking about her debut novel, Ministry of Time, and we are talking about power dynamics. And specifically, we're talking about the dynamics between the unnamed narrator and the other main character, Commander Graham Gore. Kaliane, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, why is your narrator unnamed?
It's a very, very good question. It was done very deliberately. I know what her name is. I know what her sister's name is, but I didn't want to use it in the book. So the narrator does not name herself to herself because she is herself and she considers herself the center of the universe. The book is her, basically occupying the space as the center of the universe to whom other things happen. The next level out are people who she monitors very intensively and thinks of in a kind of 360 degrees way. So the only people who are ever given full names in the book are the expats. Graham Gore, Margaret Kemble, Arthur Reginald Smythe, Thomas Cardingham, and Spencer. And that's because they are objects of study, intensive study. The next level out are people who are only ever given first names. These are people that the narrator thinks of as people, but they are characters in her story. She's the center of the universe, this is her story, and these people are just characters in it. The result is that, of course, these people aren't just characters in her story, they are main characters of their own story, they are going through their own narratives, they have their own struggles. But because she is refusing to see that, and because she is very blinkered to them, she makes certain decisions about them and about her relationship with them that sends her down different, not necessarily good paths. So these are people like her manager, Vice Secretary Adela, her colleague Somalia, her handler Quentin. They're only ever given first names. It's because she doesn't see them in the same 360 way she sees the expats. Further out from that still are people she doesn't even really think of as people. They are just functions of institutions. So there's the secretary of the ministry. He's just the secretary. For her, he is synonymous with the ministry. There's a character called the brigadier. He is only ever the brigadier. He is just a kind of alarming military power. In the same way, she never names her sister, her mother, or her father, because for her, they just fulfill the function of family. She has family, and they exist, but she wants to slightly distance herself from the complication of it, which is why she never names them.
The narrator, the unnamed narrator herself, is a translator. That's how she started. She translated Cambodian to English. But now, in a sense, she is a translator of the present, teaching Gore about the present day. So again, we see translation. This is an ongoing theme throughout the book, and I would love to hear you tell us about translation and how you're thinking about that as you wrote the book.
In my day job, I'm an editor. I work at Penguin Classics. And one of the great joys of my work is that I very often work with translators on translated texts into English. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about the politics of translation, the art of translation, the labor of translation. All of these things are very, very important to me. The narrator of the book begins as a translator at the Ministry of Defence. And one thing she warns the reader quite early on is that she got this job after having studied languages at university. So even though she is translating from her heritage language, she is coming to it as if she is a student of it, as if she's come to it completely new, as anyone else would. And her emphasis on this, I think, is slightly anxious. She's anxious to prove that she has a right to be here. She has a right to be doing this. When she finds she plateaus at the Ministry of Defence because she can't pass the field agent exams, and so she's just stuck being a translator, that at the beginning of the book, is the point she applies for this job in this new ministry, and then gets the job, as you say, as a kind of translator of the 21st century, a translator of the 21st century for Commander Graham Gore. And I really enjoyed this partly because when I was researching Victorian polar exploration, the Victorian era, and Graham Gore, before I had any thought of beginning this book, I kept on running across in all these letters and journals and contemporaneous accounts, language used in a way that was very familiar but not similar to the way we speak now. And I just find that so fascinating to watch the way that language has developed and changed, and what it means for our way of communication. A thing that really interested me was radical language, so political language, what is sometimes now called politically correct language, a phrase I really hate because it sounds really hectoring, like, well, you've got to be correct and you've got to be political. But actually, politically correct language is usually just language we agree to use to be open to other people's experiences and to be open to other people's identities and the way they identify themselves. The ministry wants the expats to prove they have assimilated, and one of the ways they have to prove it is by using the right language. And for them, it's sometimes things like you have to say car instead of horseless carriage, you have to say phone instead of unholy device. But it also means using...
It's just funny, right? Horseless carriage.
I'm really glad. I did think a lot about which hilarious things to force the expats to name. It's also them using quote-unquote politically correct language to prove that they're not going to call people slurs. And I think this is important on two levels for me. One, the reason we don't use slurs is because language is a way of shaping our worldview, right? When you use a slur, it's because you are deliberately placing someone at a lower rung. You are saying, I belong to this power structure, and in this power structure, I am above you, as you were saying earlier. That's the way that language functions in that context. But also, I'm very interested in the idea of the institutionalization of a radical language. So you take language that was radical and passionate, and you institutionalize it, and you kind of defang it. And that's where you get this term political correctness, because it's not about empathy, and it's not about passion. It's not about, opening your mind to new experiences. It's just about getting things right. And that's not empathetic. That's fearful. That's being afraid to say the wrong thing, being afraid to be told off, being afraid to get it wrong and being corrected. So I'm really interested in the way the institutionalization of language can defang it.
That is fascinating, because I felt like Gore in the book sensed that it was you're taking emotion out when you get to this politically correctness. And some of what he was objecting to was taking emotion out of language with these new terms.
Absolutely. So he is in a very tricky position because some of the things that he believes and some of the emotions that inform his language are supremacist and cruel. You know, he comes from a very different era, but he's also very worried about the idea that you do take passion and connection out of language when you are only trying to be correct, when you are just trying to say the right thing rather than attempt to communicate. There's a difference, right? There's a difference between just saying the right thing and actually communicating with someone and being open to their world.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Kaliane Bradley, and you're listening to Check This Out on New Hampshire Public Radio. We're talking about her brand new novel, Ministry of Time, which is a time travel romance, a spy thriller, and a workplace comedy all rolled into one. It is funny and very serious, and right now we are talking about the contrasts in moral attitudes or the way we approach morality or think about morality in the past versus the present day, which there are no easy answers to, which is part of this book, which is how do we wrestle with what is right and talk about what is right and teach what is right. And you talk a lot about morality and the idea of moral progress. And one example that you use is that during Graham's time in the Royal Navy, he encounters a ship filled with enslaved people. Let's talk about that moment. Describe the scene for us.
So this is also something that I ran across in my research, which was so staggering and quite difficult to deal with. And so I ended up putting it in the book because it bothered me so much. So at the time that Gore was sailing with the British Navy, slavery in the UK and in its colonies had been abolished. And the peacetime Navy set up something called, I think it was called the Preventative Squadron first. And then I ran across in my research a letter from Graham Gore. The captain of his ship and the surgeon had gone to shore and they'd been left in charge of the ship that had been captured, filled with enslaved people. And during the course of this docking, some of those people had died. And I think there was some difficulty about whether people were being taken off the ship and sold in secret. So Graham and the assistant surgeon, were asked to investigate. Neither of them spoke Spanish, which was the language they needed. And they said, it all seems fine, actually. We don't think anyone's gone missing. The way that this was written in this letter sounded so astonishingly cavalier about human life that it was really quite shocking to me. And it's possible that it sounded so cavalier because it was an official piece of correspondence. But it disturbed me to read them talking about these people dying, frightened, far from home, just as a head count.
And that they're in the belly of a ship, possibly even chained.
They're in the belly of the ship. There's nowhere else they can put them, so they have to stay in the ship.
And it was so interesting because you highlighted Gore. Of course, you made this up because you weren't there in the moment, but Gore feeling a sort of sense of being morally superior or morally in the right, I would say, because he is helping free enslaved people and stop the slave trade. And yet, look at how he did it. And you see the two characters really wrestling with what would be the right thing to do in that situation or to look back on it. What do we say about it now?
Absolutely. How should you have felt? How should you have done this? Would it have made any difference if you had felt or done things in a different way?
And it's just fascinating because, of course, the whole book is about time travel and the question of why do we time travel? What can we do with that power so that if he could go back to that moment, to that ship, could he have done anything differently? Should he have? Right? I don't know that there are answers to these questions, but they just stayed with me for a very long time after the scene.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I'd like to think that if a Victorian naval officer who'd been part of the preventative squadron was brought to the 21st century and did see the way our world looks now, I really hope that they would also spend a long time thinking, my God, could it have been different? Should I have been different?
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out on NHPR. My guest today is Kaliane Bradley, and we are talking about her brand new novel, Ministry of Time. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about the idea of being seen. Some of the time travelers that come forward to present day can't be detected by modern machines. They're basically invisible, which sounds crazy as I say that here on air. So Kaliane, can you tell me what that means? What am I talking about?
Absolutely. So the government has brought these people to the 21st century to see if there are any psychological or physiological effects of time travel. And there are obviously some psychological effects. When you are dragged out of your own era and forced to assimilate to a new era, there will be psychological effects. There are some unexpected physiological effects. And what a lot of the time travel hypotheses suggests is that, space-time is going to explode and they're going to turn into goo. Or, maybe they'll develop some kind of brand new disease because they've been forced through time. Instead, what they experience is a contrast between being physically here but mentally there. So what it is described as in the book, it's called the difference between your here-ness and your there-ness. A traveller who has been pulled out of time thinks they are still mentally there. They are in their past, they are in their original era, and they keep persistently returning to there. But they are physically here. The result is that they begin to feel a slippage between those two things. The physiological result is that modern surveillance technology, CCTV, body scanners, find it difficult or impossible to see them, to read them when they are too much there, when they have returned there, even when they're here, which is obviously really useful if you are, a secret agent or a spy, but very difficult if you are a refugee trying to come to terms with being in a new era. So that's the concept of here-ness and there-ness. And I actually got the idea for this from a book called Time Lived Without Its Flow by Denise Riley, poet and philosopher. And Time Lived Without Its Flow is an essay she wrote in the aftermath of the death of her son. It's not about the death of her son, but it is about the experience of grief. And she describes grief as taking you out of time. You don't experience linear time the way other people experience linear time when you are grieving. You cannot imagine a future, and so you find it difficult to see yourself moving through time into the future, and you're stuck in this kind of ever-locked presence while other people are moving forwards, constantly referring back to the past where the loved one was alive. And I was just so fascinated by this idea of emotional time travel and psychological time travel, this idea that grief takes you out of time and grief can pull you back through time. And I think the expats all experience grief, they all experience trauma being pulled into this new era, into the 21st century.
In a time travel novel like yours, it's sort of there's sort of a lighter side to that, right? It's time travel. They're neither here nor there. They're stuck in the middle. But there is that underlying real notion that connects to today and what could really happen, which is the idea of a refugee living as a refugee, as a time traveler, or as someone who comes to another country. It's very similar, this idea that you're not quite here or there. You're stuck in the middle. And so where are you? Where do you exist?
Yeah, exactly. And like the there that refugees often deal with is a there that no longer exists. It's their country when it was safe and when they were able to live there. And that time has gone. That place has gone. It's moved to the past. And then they come to a new country and they're persistently carrying this identity that they once had and this home they once had that just doesn't exist anymore. But they still keep, emotionally returning to it.
Yeah, and there's this one scene that you wrote where Graham says, nobody in this time period has known me for more than X number of months. And he feels like no one knows him, like he doesn't really exist because of that disconnect. And that felt very real, something that, a refugee today would also feel.
Absolutely. You're disconnected from your community, you're disconnected from anyone who ever knew you. And it can be very painful and very frightening as Graham finds it. But I also hope that, the kind of found family that the expats make among each other and some of the joys they do experience. I don't think the refugee experience is devoid of joy, but it is about having to find a new community and build those connections all over again.
Graham feels like nobody knows him, and this really brings up the idea of how do you know a person? So you have this found family, you create a new life for yourself, but you've built that. And is that really you? I feel like how many parts of you are you still protecting, or what is there? Who are you? Is this very big question that hangs over this whole idea of the there-ness and the here-ness.
And also, can you ever know anybody? Because the narrator, the bridge, studies Graham really intensively. Like she has to monitor him. She has to take his vitals every morning. She's making sure that the way he uses language, the way he moves through the world, the way he dresses, she has to record the kind of food he eats. Does that mean she knows him? Of course not. She just is monitoring him, and there's a kind of a difference of generosity, I think, there. and of openness. To really be open to knowing someone, I think you have to leave yourself slightly vulnerable, and you have to allow yourself to be slightly unsure, and you have to allow for the flexibility that someone might change or might not be the person you are trying to impose on them narratively. But of course, she doesn't want to do that. She wants a very clear-cut romantic lead.
Don't we all?
Don't we all?
Oh. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum, and you're listening to Check This Out on NHPR. My guest today is Kaliane Bradley, and we're talking about her brand new debut novel, Ministry of Time. It is about time travel, and the entire experience has me wondering, as I read page after page, is time travel a weapon? It starts off as something that seems, this is very scientific. Let's see, is this, this is a great breakthrough. But slowly pieces come out and you're wondering, can time travel be anything but a weapon?
Can it ever be neutral? Can a state with this kind of technology, with this kind of narrative changing technology, ever use it for anything but powerful means? So the thing I'm very interested with time travel is the idea of history as a narrative. So I've rather cheekily written a time travel book in which you don't see any time travel happening. It's all just in the 21st century. But there is a lot of conversation about what time travel could mean or should mean or could be used. And the vice secretary of the ministry, so one of the people who are in charge of the ministry, a woman called Adela, when asked, are we going to use, very bluntly, we're going to use this machine to go back in time and fix stuff like climate change or the existence of Hitler, says history is not a place that we travel to. History isn't a thing you fix. It's a narrative agreement about what has happened and therefore what is happening, and therefore implicitly what will happen. It is a way that we describe and control national identity. And it's a way to describe and control our fates, the way, who we could be and who we are, where we've come from. So I'm really interested. Interested is the wrong word. I thought it would be fun and alarming to let a state which already functionally controls the narrative of a nation have a machine that can allow them to change the narrative in quite a literal way.
So can you imagine time travel as being anything but a weapon?
Oh, yeah, you see, I avoided them. I avoided that question.
Because I can't.
It's tricky. Well, it's the same. So I wrote this book. I know the direct comparison is made is the splitting of the atom. And obviously we now rely very heavily on nuclear power to do things like boil a kettle, turn on the light. But the atom was originally split to kill thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Can the splitting of the atom ever be anything but a weapon? Question mark, question mark.
I guess we'll just have to keep reading and keep thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've worked on many different levels in the book industry. You've been a bookseller, used books, right? First-hand books. You've been an editor. How do you see books in the industry evolving right now?
So this is one of the great joys of my life. I do have a job that I really like. So I work at Penguin, and I'm an editor at Penguin Classics and occasionally at Alan Lane, which is a non-fiction imprint. And sometimes people ask me, does being an editor impact your ability to write? And I think it's had a very good impact on me, partly that I now think that I have a much more structured and pragmatic approach to editing my own work based on my working practice. But also, I think because I no longer edit contemporary fiction, which I did in my last job, I do think that I'm using a different brain space when I write and when I edit. It's also just a complete joy to be reading some of the greatest literature throughout history as part of my day job. Very useful, very mind-expanding.
I also understand that you used to work at a used bookshop, that you worked there for maybe 6 years, and that you really learned about books there, like how to write a book, how to be an author.
Oh, my goodness, yes. So I worked at a second-hand bookshop on the Charing Cross Road in London for 6 years. And I also did, I worked for a year at Waterstones, which is our big chain bookstore here in the UK. And I think being a bookseller has made me a better editor, certainly better at working in the publishing industry, and a better writer. I just think bookshops, I know this is a cliche, and I'm sure every author you ever get on this says this, but it's so true. Bookshops and booksellers are so essential because they are the community node. They are the place, they are the people who understand what readers are reading, the way that the kind of the literary architecture works, and they are in contact with the public, they are in contact with publishing houses, they are in contact with authors. They are like the center. I love booksellers, and I'm glad I was one because I think I wouldn't necessarily appreciate just how vital they are and how much they contribute to a literary ecosystem if I hadn't been.
But the literary ecosystem is evolving in ways I hadn't expected. For example, Book Talk on TikTok is now huge too. What do you think about that?
I think anything that gets books to readers is great, and I'm very, very glad. I'm unfortunately not on social media, so I can't comment on it as a user, but I love the idea that you don't need conventional channels to be championed. And I think that's great, especially for marginalized writers or writers from marginalized identities and communities who may have found that, mainstream outlets or mainstream structures have ignored them, but then they can be discovered and championed on places like BookTok.
So given, again, that you've seen all different sides of the book industry, what do you wish every writer knew?
Ooh, what do I wish every writer knew about the books industry? Everyone in the books industry is truly and honestly trying their best, but they are often very, very overworked. And no one is being deliberately ignored. Sometimes it can be very painful, I know, as a novelist, especially a first-time novelist, to enter the jaws of the publishing machine and to feel like a tiny pea on a very large plate. But the truth is, your book was bought because people really believed in it and people really wanted to make it work.
On another note, what advice do you have for new writers as a writer yourself?
I'm going to speak from my very, very specific experience here of having got this novel out the starting gates and into the shops, which is, to me, it's just a miracle in itself. And I found that what was different between writing this and writing the other novel, which I mentioned earlier in this interview, the big British Cambodian novel, was that for one of them I was having quite a lot of fun and I was writing the fun bits. And for the other one I was not having fun and I was struggling because I felt obligated. And there is such a difference between writing because you feel obligated or because you think it is the right thing to be writing or that you need to write it, and writing because you just want to write the fun bits. So my main piece of advice is write the fun bits. Write the fun bits and then go back through it. And if you need to fill in the non-fun bits, do. But the way you're going to get that manuscript down is to write the fun bits.
And the fun bits turned into Ministry of Time.
Fun bits turned into Ministry of Time. And by that, I don't mean the silly bits. I don't mean the light bits. I mean the bits that I enjoyed writing.
And this other big book that you felt compelled to write, where is it in the process?
It is a finished draft that will never see the light of day.
Thank you, Kaliane Bradley, for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you. It's been a complete joy, and I'm really delighted to have been here and to be interviewed by you.
You've been listening to Check This Out, a new literary series which is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire. We dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. My producer today is Jessica Hunt. The Howe Library Director is Ruby Simon. NHPR's Program Director is Emily Quirk. The show is sponsored by the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation and the Howe Library Corporation. Thanks so much for listening. I will be back in the fall with Season 3. See you then.